Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight we are joined by Graham Quattlebaum, LPC-Associate and former police officer.
Yes, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. We've been chatting and catching up a little bit. I had a chance to read through your story that you had sent over and take a look at the website, but we're going to get into all kinds of information about what it was like being a first responder and transitioning into the world of therapy and being a therapist. But I think a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing your story tonight and just kind of your perspectives on therapy and all these wonderful things.
Okay.
Yeah. So you were a cop, huh?
Yep. Straight out of, I grew up just north of here in Denton, the Denton area, and went to UNT, came straight out of college, and some guys I knew worked for Dallas PD, so basically graduated college, parents kind of said, time to grow up, and applied for Dallas PD, and that was the only place I applied and started the academy, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you had shared some interesting perspectives on just kind of what that process is like, getting into, academy, but the process of becoming a cop, and I'm sure we'll develop this conversation in depth, but just that whole process of what that's like being a dude in the law enforcement arena and not necessarily always being able to talk about your feelings without. I guess between you and I, we know it goes much deeper than this, but like looking quote unquote weak.
Right.
Yeah.
So almost instantly, and the academies I'm hoping are changing these days, but back then, early 2000s, when you started, it was still run by the 80s and 90s. So there was no mental health. There was no, hey, let's kind of process what you just saw or what you just went through or what just happened to you or your friends. It was bury it, go home, don't talk to your family. I mean, this is in the academy, they're telling you your family does not want to hear anything that you're going through. Just hide it, pretend you're okay so you can come back to work the next day. So it was essentially, looking back on it, probably like a brainwashing to make us show up to work every day.
Yeah.
Just to kind of, human robots almost.
Yeah, you had made that mention, and I instantly was thinking like, it's kind of like a forced compartmentalization that then becomes the norm.
Yep.
I've sat with a lot of cops in therapy. You and I were talking about, I have some buddies who were cops and who are now therapists, and they seem to have a similar narrative around just kind of like, not just the robotic nature, but not necessarily a system that abdicates for talking through really traumatic experiences that you guys witness out there.
Right. And I think part of it comes from the not showing weakness for fear of the department saying that you're not fit for duty. That's a really big thing with police officers, is not being fit for duty. We're all told horror stories about other officers that have been deemed not fit for duty, and you never see them again. So it's pretty much a career ender. I don't know anybody that's ever come back from that status. But then also you have to think, if you're not able to handle something and you're showing weakness, the idea that officers are going to want you around them and work with you to get into specialized units, to get into the SWAT team, to get into narcotics and all those types of things where it may be a lot more dangerous. It's almost, I almost want to call it a survival tactic of just pretend you're okay so that everybody thinks that you have your stuff together, basically. So
Being on both sides right now with some perspective, what do you think the balance would be, knowing that it may or may not happen in a system like that, but what would the balance kind of start to look like if we started to shift a conversation into working with these guys when they're having a hard time? Is there even an avenue for that, do you think, in the police department?
I think it's getting there. I just retired in October, and it was much better. I don't know what changed in me. I got to a point where I saw all the young guys, and maybe it was because I was the old guy, and I did not want them to kind of go through the same things that I did. I started just sharing my story, sharing, hey, I don't sleep well, or hey, I used to have paranoia, or I became a vegetarian because the smell or sight of blood started to bother me. And I had hid all those things for years, but I started sharing it with the guys. Like, if you're going through this, it's okay. I just didn't want to feel like alone,
Yeah.
Now, I got a lot of dirty looks. I got a lot of younger officers being kind of annoyed with me if I spent a lot of time asking them questions. But I think, especially the younger generation, is more in tune with going to therapy.
Sure.
So, I guess my generation is probably the older guys now. So, as my generation leaves, I think the new generation will be more open to it, at least an avenue for it.
Yeah. And you became, from what I was reading, a hostage negotiator of sorts,
Yep.
right? Directly, from what I was reading. And
Yep.
was there kind of a progression later in your career where you always knew you were going to start to move in this direction of kind of more the human to human interactions on that type of like connection?
I was always fascinated by it. I don't know that I ever thought I would become a therapist. That was kind of just by chance, I guess. I don't know, but I was always fascinated by what motivates these people to behave this way. So especially like when they're in crisis or even a family violence call, what led this family to having this crisis moment or, yeah. So once I started to really question the why behind things, I really got interested in mental health, being a crisis officer or a mental health officer as well as a hostage negotiator. I got to learn a little bit more than the average officer gets to learn about mental health, and that just kind of sent me down this path of wanting to know more and more and more. So.
Yeah. Did the Dallas PD, did they have, well, I imagine they use like EAP, kind of like how a corporate would do that, but did they have officers on duty that had some of these trainings and backgrounds to come in, talk to you guys, or was that not a thing in the Dallas PD? Like therapists of sorts, psychologists, LPCs, things like
They
that?
do have an EAP.
Okay.
Most departments do have EAPs now. The one thing you have to realize though is first responder in my experience, first responders are not at a place while they're still working to consistently go to therapy
Yeah.
because we're hard-headed. Um, we a lot of us have been ingrained not to talk about this stuff, right? And then you're opening up vulnerabilities that then they have to go back on the street, be able to close up and go back on the street and continue to not let things affect them. So you're teaching them coping skills and all these things, which are great, but they're opening up to you, giving you all these vulnerabilities, and then, maybe later that day, they're back on the street answering something else that's really, really terrible.
Yeah.
So I know as a client, I'm a terrible client. My own therapist tells me all the time, she doesn't say, see you next week. She says, I'll see you when I see you. And that just, maybe that's my generation of policing. Maybe the younger guys are better at it, but.
Yeah. Well, we break down our barriers in our own time, don't we?
Yeah, that's true. And the EAPs, I mean, there is such a mistrust with how the department's going to handle somebody that's struggling with mental health. Now, all the departments that I know of are all like, we'll help however we can. Here's the EAP, here's the free hotline, all of that type of stuff. That doesn't take away that not fit for duty stigma that everybody's afraid of.
Yeah. I imagine there's got to be some kind of known criteria for what you'd have to come out diagnosed with to be not fit for duty. Is that ever shared with you guys when you're in the line of duty?
I don't know what the criteria is, except for you're not handling life right, you're not handling the calls right, and you're a liability to the city.
Yeah.
I think that would be the three criteria. I don't think they would even know of a diagnosis. I mean, if you had to get on some type of medication that was, you know, affecting your ability to drive or something like that, obviously you would have to share that. But there's, yeah, I don't think the EAPs actually share anything with the departments, but it's just there's no trust.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's where the road would be met with mental health decisions versus bureaucratic decisions.
I mean, it's all about liability, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. You know, and I'm sure as the conversations unfold, as you and I even come back on the show and have you back on, that there's a million things we could discuss, but at a certain point you meet a wall with some of those kind of things when it comes to the city and then
yeah.
the state and federal. And then we're contending with what I think sometimes is the travesty on the mental health side on the internet as it pertains to first responders with all of over the years, right? Defund the police. And there's the, you know, conversations of like, you look at it from like the first responders perspectives. And I want to maybe hear yours on this of like therapy is like, I'll put it like this, from the cops I've worked with, therapy is this woke stuff that if I step in there, I'm going to be talking about these, you know, kind of like frilly, soft conversations. And I think there's kind of like this clash between the two worlds where there's a more balanced discussion to be had for first responders to be able to integrate with this world.
Yeah, I think the idea, and we try to I try to break that with my clients right away. Especially just even the initial consultation we have with them. Every time you come in, I'm not going to say, sit down and tell me your deepest, darkest, hardest stuff, right? What's bothering you today? Let's start there sometimes. You know, yes, we'll eventually get into traumatic events that have happened to you or whatever, but it doesn't always have to be, and I think that's part of the stigma is everybody thinks it's, oh, I'm going to have to go in there and, you know, I don't want to tell them about whatever terrible thing they did the day before. I'm not ready to process that. And no, I don't think well, I hope not every counselor will be forcing that upon people. But like I said before, with the stigma of counseling and the, how you were saying the weakness, it's almost, I still feel like it's a survival. Like if people find out that I'm going to therapy, they're going to think I don't know how to respond if people are shooting at us or if I have to shoot somebody. So are they going to show up when I need them or are they going to distance themselves and I'm going to be working alone most of the time because nobody trusts me?
Yeah, which that's what a stigma does, right? It's a paradox because the guy you want next to you is the guy who's willing to look at himself and look at those difficult. I mean, this is kind of like I would say just like a spiritual principle in life. It's like the person I want next to me is the guy who's willing to admit his mistakes and do better next time.
Right, right.
And that's what therapy helps us accomplish. But the paradox of stigmas as they arise is like when we make up the thoughts in our own head before actually experiencing how beneficial these things can be, and then a system takes over that stigma and says, yeah, no, we're not touching this.
Yeah. It's way harder to work on yourself than it is to shove everything down and pretend like everything's fine. And you're way more dangerous doing that than you are coming and processing even small stuff, even stuff from your childhood. It doesn't have to be all about law enforcement or all about firefighting or paramedics or dispatchers or whatever. It can simply be, let's work on smaller stuff. It doesn't always have to be the deep, you know, super traumatic events that you've been through. So,
yeah, therapy I've always found is about the minutia, the day to day. You know, we're going to get to those deeper rooted issues, and we'll find ourselves talking about your mom, but we'll get there in time. You know. Yeah. But that day to day. And I couldn't think of anybody more suited to talk about the day to day than a first responder who's out there seeing like the real world day to day. And I think that gets kind of swept over sometimes of like, you know, you see a cop on the street and you don't stop and think about the things that they have to see day in and day out or the fears they have to face, you know, being out interacting with unsafe characters and our day-to-day world out here, especially in a metropolitan area.
Yeah. And I learned this near the end of my career. And I wish I would have never ignored it, but we also don't think about the families at home, like the first responder family at home. Not only are they dealing with the first responders, all their baggage they're bringing with them, but what they're going through while they're out there and the fears they make up in their own mind. So just as equally important for them to have therapy and process some of these things than it is for, I almost said us, but I'm retired, so them.
Yeah, it's a good point. I have a few, right? Because I work with, we were talking before, I work with 12-steppers who are either actively, in recovery for substance use, but the predominant population I work with is family members.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of first responder family members, interestingly, get drawn in my direction because they're dealing with very similar symptoms of powerlessness when their loved one is going out, right? It's like firefighter wives and cop wives and there's a lot of unmanageability in that, and a lot of just things that are outside of your control. And I think people find they can either cope with that or it drives them up a wall. And so that whole system getting the support is really, really important.
Yeah. The amount of jokes, I say jokes, they weren't even jokes, but you touched on first responders and alcohol. That was the thing we did. That was, we got off shift and we met at a parking lot and we all drank together, or somebody would go through something hard and they would joke, "Oh, I'll just have a bottle of Jack or whatever." And then over time you see that person and you realize they're not kidding. They're really drinking every single day to cope with this, instead of obviously learning a good coping mechanism. They're just trying to numb all of that anxiety and all of those types of things. And then there's ones that can't, maybe they didn't grow up with a good support system, or they don't have a support system at home, and unfortunately they end up taking their lives. So, but
it's an interesting doorway too, because as you shared in your background and history, that you would start to in your later career take time to sit with some of the younger cops and hear them out. One of the things I've noticed as well with the cops that have come on to my caseload over the years is a lot of being raised in unstable environments where they kind of become the fixer or the saver, right? And things that when you look at it, it's like not the most shocking progression that they would go out and try to fix the world, right? And I'm curious if you saw that too, working in your police department, that not only are there those who are going to turn to the unhealthy coping mechanisms in that way, but then there are those who want to help fix and save the world, and how that can become unmanageable too.
Yes, you get part of the brainwashing is, and I brainwashing is a strong word, but I still feel myself defending some of the things I learned in the police academy, and that was a long time ago. So it was a brainwashing. Some people might not like to hear that, but and I think it had to be, especially back then. Well, I don't know, maybe that's my brainwashing too. That I felt like it helped me survive. It helped me show up to work every day. That's for sure. But I completely forgot your question now.
Yeah, just the system aspects, right? Like the roles we play, because you were touching.
I was going to say the God complex.
Yeah.
It's funny when I first started my own journey in therapy. It was a bad call. It was nobody's fault what happened. The person calling 911 couldn't give the dispatcher the correct information. We couldn't find what they were trying to tell us because it was the wrong streets and the wrong directions. And then when the event ended, and I finally started going to therapy, that was my biggest, it wasn't the people that I saw that had gotten hurt and all that type of stuff. It was, I should have been able to do more. I should have done more. And my therapist looked at me and I won't cuss right now, but she said, "Who are you, Jesus effing Christ?" And that really opened my eyes to, am I trying to save the world? What is my role in all of this? How am I responsible for that guy's actions and all of these things that happen? Because you do hold yourself responsible.
Yeah.
Especially on something like that when you're so close, and then it was a wrong way driver basically, and they ended up killing a family, but they were giving the wrong directions on the highway, and we didn't know which highway they were even talking about. Yeah. So, and it was very confusing. But beating yourself up over, man, I should have known. Well, how could you know? Who are you, Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
And there's so many circumstances like that where, you go back and beat yourself up so much when you're only a human doing what you can. Yeah. Now, you said something about we were talking about coping skills. I feel like I was very blessed with, I don't think I would have been as healthy as I was unhealthy for a while, but I think I would have gone a lot further down a dark hole had I come from a broken family. I feel like very few of us are lucky that came from the background I did, but a lot of officers don't have that, and firefighters and a lot of first responders don't have that. And then we throw them out into all this trauma and say, go home and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So we're setting them up for failure.
I'd say so. I mean, I'm not sure how you get society behind a shift in that, but I think it's certainly worth it when this clearly is the conversation that's come to light over the last 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
And thank God people are talking about it too, because I guess I've always submitted to the idea of, like, when I pick up the phone and call 911, I want somebody to show up, and I would hope that, and maybe this is just kind of the types of individuals that we are as well, is like, I would hope that that person that does show up is somebody who gets to take care of themselves too, and is off the clock at some point and not having to take all that home.
Yeah.
But I think listening to you and you and I working with individuals in these backgrounds, we know that's not always the case, that they don't know how to not take it home sometimes, right. Especially the young ones. The young cops I work with, that's a lot of the beginning work, is just the detachment of, like, hey, man, like, you're doing a really good thing for your community, but when you're done,
turn it off.
Go home.
Yeah. I feel like I was always good at that, and maybe because, you have the guys that you work around that they knew from the time they were really little that that's what they wanted to do. I never had that thought that I wanted to be a police officer. I got my bachelor's in criminal justice, and I joke and say it was because it was the least amount of math that I had to take. I only had to take one math class, and I barely passed that. But so I never, and I was lucky with a friend group that we all grew up together, and we're still all friends, and there's a lot of us. And so and none of them are police officers. None of them even know anything about it. So I could leave there. It played well for me to turn it off and not talk about it or act like it or think like it, be the 24/7 cop. Now, it didn't do well if I needed to talk to one of them way back in the day. They'd be like, tell me your worst story. And I'd be like, I don't really want to talk about that right now. But they didn't understand that, right? Yeah. So, but it allowed me to learn before children and everything how to completely turn that off and leave that behind. Now, maybe I feel like I did a good job. I may not have always done a good job, but
we can't be perfect, right?
Yeah. So,
I kind of share that perspective, and I wonder, right? This was something I wanted to ask you about too, because you're stepping into, again, another profession where in the beginning it's like relearning that skill all over again of leaving this different side, right? Because early in your career as a cop, you're learning detachment from, like, the difficult things you're seeing. Now it's the detachment of the difficult things you're hearing that other people are seeing.
Right.
I remember early in my career, and this is how I've always related it to the first responders I work with, is like, a psychiatrist told me early on, he said, when you sit down with a client, it's like they're handing you a hot potato. All right. And if you don't hand it back to them, it's going to start to burn you up. Because I had gone to him and I was sitting down with him. I was like, I have this like burning pit in my stomach and I don't know. And I had been like traumatized by one of my clients, like really graphic like stories, and he was reliving it in the room, and I did not know how to detach.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you're kind of, as you're navigating into this field, seeing that kind of nuanced like detachment that comes up for all of us.
Yeah, I think coming from the law enforcement field and hostage negotiating and mental health officer type stuff, you already kind of have, like I've heard a lot of terrible things. I've seen a lot of terrible things. So I haven't had a client yet that surprised me with what they told me, or maybe like kind of feel bad, or not. I don't want to say feel bad. That's not what I mean. But like surprise me or shock me, right?
Yeah.
Now it is a completely different exhaustion level. Sharing those emotions with somebody and holding that for them in that moment, and then figuring out how, like you're saying, how to give them the hot potato back, how to, okay, next client's coming in. I mean, I could work a 12-hour shift all through the night and be less tired than I am seeing a couple clients. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It is a totally different endurance, I think is probably the right word, to learn how to do it. And I'm still learning it. You know, when my wife first started our practice, I probably said a lot of the wrong things. Like, you have 10 minutes in between sessions. Why don't you type your clinical notes? Or, you know, why are you not eating? You have plenty of time in between clients, 10 minutes or whatever. And now I get it. You're just trying to, like you said, pass that hot potato over here, and then the next one's coming in.
Yeah.
So it is definitely an adjustment,
Yeah.
a good adjustment, but it's exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, imagine like kind of like an athlete where you're used to like explosive movements, and now it's more methodical. It's like going from playing football to being a gymnast.
Right.
You know, it's like it's more methodical. You got to stay warm, and you got to do it for the long haul of a day.
Right. Yeah. And I can't speak for all first responding, but law enforcement is very, like you were saying, like just like an athlete. It's like explosive. Things are crazy. Not all the time, but things are crazy. Adrenaline's pumping, and then everything slows way down, and you have to recover from that adrenaline dump and everything. And then, oh, here it comes again. And yeah, like you said, therapy is like playing the long game, and making sure that you are recovering well enough, even day to day, to be there fully for your clients the next day or the next client that comes in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And, I remember early in my career, my therapist came along. I had been in the field for 7 years and thought I knew what was up, and I had never taken a vacation. She's like, "What are you doing?" I was just young and just like go, go, go.
Yeah.
But taking those vacations throughout the year are a godsend.
Oh yeah, we try to at least take a weekend every month or two. Just either take a long weekend or actually get out of town, completely disconnect from everything. You know, sometimes we bring our teenagers with us, and sometimes it just needs to be me and her, just to kind of ground ourselves and reconnect and, recharge our batteries for sure.
Which I think is a good segue too for, you know, let's say first responder pops on here, they happen to be a cop. How's the community aspect, you know, kind of looking if somebody is having a hard time, do you feel like that's opening up like dudes they can turn to? Did you feel like you were connected with a community in this area? Is that like, or is there still kind of some of those stigmas of like community building and things like that within these police departments?
Are you saying if they want to come in as a client, or what?
Well,
or while
like
I was an
personal
officer?
life community. Yeah.
Okay,
Like
while I
while
was
you
an
were,
officer talking with younger officers, is that what you mean?
yeah, just like your community aspect. Like, let's say somebody's listening to this who is a first responder. Is that something that's cultivated? Is that something that you found to be strong, like where your police department was, like dudes that you could turn to and hang out even if you weren't talking through stuff, like
Yes and
off the
no.
clock?
Yeah, like I said, I had very good friends at work, but when I left work, most of the time they didn't hear from me. I would check, like there are probably 5 or 6 guys that I check in on regularly. Not that I feel like they're struggling, but maybe we have some type of trauma bond, or we went through something really terrible together, and we'll just a quick message like, "Hey, just checking in." And it can be something as simple as that. Hey, just checking in, and you may get a long response, or you may get a, "Hey, I'm good. How are you?" Like something really short. When the long response comes, stop, take some time, because they're probably not talking to anybody else about it. So, and it is a good thing. I feel like with me especially, and my first responder friends, I don't know that they would sit down in front of me like this. One of my friends would sit down with me and share how they're struggling, but typing their story out or texting their story out, I feel like they connect with me really well. The ones I check on, and these are guys that, I mean, like what I would consider like a real street cop, like from tried and true. You know what I mean? Like guys that you would look at and are like, that's the hardest guy I've ever met. And then you get a text message saying, just all soft and mushy, and he would never say that stuff in person, but that I think that's the way my generation of guys connect, and I think that takes away some of the vulnerability of it, just texting it to me. But even when, there were people, I started to annoy some of the younger guys because I would stop and ask them, just randomly, "Hey, you look a little different today. What's going on with you?" Like just something like that. And then all of a sudden I would learn that, they are really struggling. They may not say anything right then, but a message comes across the computer like, "Hey, thanks for checking on me. I really needed that today," or something like that. So I started realizing that I guess it was probably my age where I stopped caring about the stigma of not fit for duty or whatever. And I told my wife, I was like, I'm going to share my story in front of all these people, or I'm going to share my story, with these officers. And if they don't think I'm fit to work here, then I'll just go do something else. Because it was more important for me to let people know that, number one, it's okay to not be okay. And number two, we're all going through it. We're just hiding it from each other, which is, we're just killing ourselves. So I started sharing my story with the younger officers, and some of them I may never have talked to again, and some of them would come and say, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this or that." And as I got more and more interested in mental health, I started doing it on calls with families. I won't say a last name, but I remember a young officer that I worked with. I'll just call him John. I could feel how annoyed he would get. He is a great street cop. He wants to be out there, drugs, guns, bad guys, all that stuff. But he would get sent to 911 calls with me, and I would sit down on these people's couches with them. Let's figure out how we got here. What is the cycle that we're in that is continuing? Why do we keep coming out here? Like, what are we doing, and what are we not changing? And he wasn't allowed to leave, so I could see him, and he's a big guy. I could see him pacing and getting annoyed and rolling his eyes, and I don't. As he progresses in his career, I think he'll start to understand. He probably understands now because I talk to him all the time. But it was just funny how annoyed he would get with me, because he just wants to. Most officers just want to get in, solve this quick problem, and then get out. But as I learned about mental health, I was like, let's get in there. Let's spend a little bit of extra time with these people. Maybe they'll look at police officers in a different light, even if we had to arrest mom or dad or whatever. But maybe we won't have to come back tonight or tomorrow or the next day or next month. So it was just a change in mindset that the younger guys, they're gung-ho, most of them.
Sure.
So
Yeah. I want to get out there and, like you said, catch some bad guys. It's
and sitting listening to me talk about mental health to a family that they don't know, they weren't.
Yeah, this isn't what I signed up for.
yeah.
But it's a valuable message too, because it's like, as I'm listening to you share that, it's kind of like when you spend time with a kid, never underestimate those small amounts of time that you just slow down and listen to them and how impactful that is. And it kind of intersects with, when you look at it psychologically, repeat offenders, people who are constantly having to have the cops come out, they're operating from a very young place. And I know as a first responder, you saw that, where it's like you show up and that may be a grown man, but he's not acting like one.
You're right.
And taking that, just listening to you as a cop and imagining, like, even back in the day when I was running around with the wrong crowds and getting arrested, if any of those cops, and some of them did, take the time, right?
Yeah.
I remember this one guy, I'd gotten arrested for the third time, and he looks down in the car, he's like, "Hello, Alan." And he just took a little bit of time, and it just is always
Yeah,
stuck
you remember
with me.
him.
Yeah, I
Right.
remember his face. Wish I remembered his name, but he left an impression on me of like, I don't want to see this guy again. It was the second time I had seen him, and the first time I saw his partner.
Yeah.
And it's like, he took the time to chat with me, like, "Hey, is everything okay?" And everything wasn't okay. And it left an impression on me, you know? And so I resonate with you sharing that. And I think it's important that officers hear that kind of stuff too, maybe in their training.
And I think, if you look at a career as it's winding to an end, and then of course you think about your own legacy with that police department, or are people going to remember me? And just those little impactful moments, like spending a little bit of extra time with somebody, maybe that's your legacy. I don't know. But it meant a lot to me, to even for families to see me later and stop and be like, "Hey, I really appreciate you spending extra time with our son. He's doing much better," or whatever, or maybe he's not doing better, whatever. But it meant a lot to that person, just to spend a couple extra minutes with them. That was, I guess, my way of, especially with the younger officers, just my way of not letting, not that I can change their struggles they're going to go through, but at least not making them feel like my generation, where you were feeling like you were going through it alone. So.
Yeah. I feel like that's a huge piece too, because I guess any environment where you're interacting with the community face to face with people, there's an aspect where it's equally, we've got to get on with it, right? We've got to show up and get on with it. But the aspect of taking that time, and then once you do, now you've entered into, what we were talking about earlier, aspects where we're going to have to detach from it. And anytime you do that, you're going to need a community to support you. And I think that, and you could speak to this more eloquently than I could, but there's such a concept of brotherhood, right, with law enforcement, and then these little threads that could kind of use some work. And I had a teammate, he's a cop now, George, I love you. He will probably watch these and reach out too. And he mentions when these topics come up of like, man, I wish this was talked about more. So it's nice to have you on tonight too, knowing that this is information that people are craving. They want to talk more about the deepening of connections in these brotherhoods, because it is important as well, just I think for the safety of our society, but also the safety for you guys.
And the hard part is admin pushes all of these programs. We're gonna have an 8-hour course on, officer health. And just as an officer myself, and I was mostly a street cop most of my 20 years. I didn't want to be in a classroom. I didn't want somebody that wasn't, I don't know how to say that, who wasn't tested, telling me how to handle myself at work, basically. So not that I have that, not that I'm giving myself that credential, but the guys that I started talking to and opening up to, I guess, like I said, I just wanted to share with them, my struggles and give them, even before I went to school and learned strategies and coping skills and theories and all that type of stuff. Before that, I would just tell them my story and what helped me. And I would say, try it. If it doesn't help you, then come back to me and let's talk about something else. Yeah. Let's talk about a different way that may keep you from staying awake all night and pacing the house and looking out the windows because you think somebody's coming. That type of thing. And it's to take an officer off the street, exactly what we talked about with the God complex or the I'm going to fix the world and save the world. Do you think that the officer's learning anything? All they're thinking about is, I don't want to be sitting in this class. I just want to be out there on the street. And for whatever reason that is, maybe they're just chasing adrenaline. That was probably my fault. That was probably my doing what I like to do. Sure. But so that's why if we can get actual street cops to start talking to each other, and like I said, I think this younger generation is much better than my generation was. If we can get them to start talking to each other, we won't need training classes or that type of stuff. Or, EAPs are great. I don't know how many people actually use them and trust them. It may be more than I know. Like, we used to use it, but it was never for me. It was always for our kids. We didn't, because I didn't trust it. So I would rather pay a bunch of money over here, cash pay, so nobody knows, rather than, sign up with my name on the EAP.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And that seems to be something that's shifting just, in the last, I would say really 10 years. Cause like, I'd say the first 3-4 years of my career, weren't seeing a lot of first responders, weren't seeing a lot of like doctors. And it's like, there's been a real shift where, it really has kind of opened up in more of an open discussion. And not that it's like, oh, that's so much better than old school. I think there's a nuance in one of the things you said that I really liked is like, and you had kind of adjusted it as you shared it of, I want to be able to talk to someone who's tested. It's like, look, when I talk about some of the recovery aspects of my personal life, right, of like growing up around the family disease and in the family disease of addiction, I want to talk to someone who's tested in that. And not only, but some of my deepest support is in that because they're going to share things where I'm like, man, this person's telling my story. Right. And I think one of the things you're touching on that's worth echoing is it's loud and fast out there for first responders, and someone who isn't tested like that. I think about like if you've never coached on a field and you try to go out there and yell at all the players, you're going to lose your voice if you haven't done it. Right. Whereas the coach who's been doing it for 15 years, you wonder why this guy's voice is just always able to go. It's because it's a skill, right? And I think there really is something about those different types of skills in life being tested, and those who are actively doing it being able to hear their story in that. Which is, it's also just nice too that we're sitting with someone who's transitioned into the field of psychology to be able to sit in a quieter place, but know how loud it is. Right.
And yeah, you touched on something, and it just slipped my mind, but the departments, they contract with therapists that are going to give the best rate, right? That doesn't mean they're the best people for the officers that are going to go there. And so say back in the day when an event happened and they sent us to a counselor, we're street cops, we're we don't want to be in front of this person anyways. And then we talk to that person, and the mindset is they haven't been through, and military, I think, deals with this too. They haven't been through what I've been through. They're not going to understand. And what it took me a very long time to come to grips with is they don't have to understand. Like, I will never understand your actual experience. That doesn't mean I can't sit with you in it and validate it and that type of stuff. But for many, many years, I was resistant to therapy because one of the first ones I saw had only been a cop 2 years, and then he quit because it wasn't for him and became a licensed therapist. I sat in front of him, thought, this guy doesn't know nothing about nothing because he was a cop in a little bitty town, and I was brainwashed to think that Dallas PD was the top of the top. So I gave him no respect. I did my time and I left, and I never took a single word that he said. He probably could have he could have saved me years of terrible coping skills and anxiety and all sorts of stuff had I just taken the time and trusted him. So I guess, yeah, I mean, the family, or the thin blue, I don't want to call it the thin blue line, but the police family is very strong in the fact that we trust each other with our lives. Why are we not trusting each other? If I could die for you, why can't I sit with you for 5 minutes and tell you that I'm struggling?
Yeah.
It doesn't make
Why
any
can't
sense.
I talk to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully it's changing. And part of that is a little bit of hope that I saw right before I retired was I would be training a rookie, and they would literally tell me, my therapist told me this. And in my mind, I'm like, I would never have told, and my FTOs would have kicked me out of the car or hit me or whatever they used to do to us back then if I ever said anything about I'm going to therapy back then. So I think it is changing where the kids are more open to it. Even our teenage son's friends will say, "Oh, my therapist told me this." That's all new to me.
Yeah.
And I think there is going to be a shift whenever they get the old crusty guys out.
Yeah.
That were trained by even crustier guys.
Sure.
So
Well, they'll come see them now that they're therapists.
yeah.
I have a question that I ask everybody when they're new on the show. If we were going to build a mental health amusement park and you got to build a ride there, what would the ride be? What would you name it? And what would it do?
Oh my gosh. Just off the top of my head, it would just be, the stick to the walls ride, and I would just name it the Tasmanian Devil because as I was going through my journey, learning about my anxiety and dealing with my anxiety, I had a therapist tell me to give my anxiety a name. It was the Tasmanian Devil in my chest, just constantly tearing up this area. So maybe that's all I can think of.
Yeah. Those are the ones at the fair where you're like on the wall.
Yeah.
And when you're a kid, you're trying to stand up.
right. And then one person gets sick and it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. God bless. Yeah, I like that. While you have the captive audience here, is there any last just words that you would share with those who are listening in?
Well, one, just take care of each other. But I think what was most impactful for me, I said it earlier and I didn't really touch on it, but I think as a first responder, and I think maybe even societal pressures as a man, that not being okay is a terrible thing. And I think that just understanding that there are days and there are times that you're not going to be okay, and that's okay, and we can all get through it.
Yeah.
And share your story with each other, because as you share it, it heals you, and you never know who you're going to help also just sharing your own story. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And where can they find Heartwood Counseling and Wellness?
We have 3 offices in Colleyville. You know the address?
Why don't we do the website? Because I feel like they're listening online, they may be more inclined to.
Okay.
Is it still Quattlebaum?
It,
the website?
that will get you there, but that's harder to spell. It's heartwoodcounselingtx.com.
Gotcha. HeartwoodCounselingTX.com.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put that in the comments when we, there'll be the live video. I'm going to repost the solid video. That'll have your guys' website link in there for you as well. I really appreciate you coming out tonight.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Graham Quattlebaum, licensed professional counselor associate. We break the cycle here every Friday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We will see you next week with another guest. We love you.